Yeah.
Like that? Yeah, well, because we're trying to schedule. I'll go back there with you.
Morning, Allie. Great. Yep. Ready for a daily challenge. Opportunities are out there.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I looked it up.
I found a sign.
We went through our cold snaps out there. Now we're uphill.
This week. Next week, it sounds like it's going to go down.
Well, you know, they were saying this weekend it was going to be cold. Now it's supposed to be 36 or something.
Did you see where Inga Bunbury Langston?
Good morning, everybody. We're going to start our workshop here in 1 second. I thought maybe I might take about a minute or two to tell you all the great information that was shared with me by the President this last week, some of which I'm sure everybody will hear tomorrow in the State of the Union address. I think he reaffirmed that he has a strong commitment to cities and metro areas across this country and knows the importance of the work that we do in terms of job creation, and certainly this is the place where people live and they work, and the GDP of this country is produced, and he knows how important it is that we keep the economy rolling in these areas. At the same time, I think he's a realist and understands what's going to be he's up against with Congress and what they want to do and how that'll work out. And I think it's going to be a painful year first of all, in the whole of Congress, but certainly getting agreement between the Senate and the House. Hopefully, from our standpoint at the local government nonpartisan level, we don't much care when somebody calls us whether there's, should we say, the guy on the other end of the phone or the woman on the other end of the phone is a Democrat or a Republican or a Green Party or a No Party. We have to fix their pothole or their sewer or their street or their sidewalk or their park or library and have an open, honest discussion with them about that and try to figure out how we can meet their needs. I will tell you that the Republican Study Committee that put their proposals together, I'll just highlight to you what they have in mind, and hopefully there will be some discussion and moderation of their suggestions. They are essentially suggesting, and I think I'll highlight the ones that some of which are important to our citizens, and ones that we enjoy some support of here in the city of Des Moines. They are essentially saying that they would strike the funding for certain specific government programs, and they would include, and there's a huge list of them, but the ones that I sort of thought were important that I might note. The Corporation for Public Broadcasting, essentially eliminate that, $445 million a year. The National Endowment for the Arts program will go to zero. They'll X out $167.5 million. The Amtrak subsidies, they're going to take out $1.5 billion there. The Community Development Block Grant, that's important to every city, especially over 50,000, that gets direct funding from the federal government, and one of those plans that Richard Nixon started way back in the 70s to zero. They propose cutting $4.5 billion out of that one. The New Starts projects for transit that I think that we've been hopeful that Des Moines will get some more support on. They will take that to zero and X out $2 billion of that. The inner-city high-speed rail grants, they would X that out, $2.5 billion. Title X family planning, $318 million a year, essentially helping a lot of folks that can otherwise have trouble planning and financing and figure out how to make ends meet. Take that program out, $1.27 billion. And also the Agency for International Development that works a lot on exports and some other programs, $1.39 billion. Take those out completely. It's going to be an interesting year. So some of these affect our budget, and I think that with that, I'd be happy to, at some point, we'll spend some more time on it, but those are kind of some highlights, some encouragement that the President, I think, and his administration are going to continue to try to work with us, but they know that there has to be a lot of compromise to put a budget together that's going to be accepted by everybody. So with that, let's turn it over to the manager and talk about the responses to our council questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Before I begin, I do want to acknowledge Jeb Brewer, our city engineer, is back with us today.
Nice to have him back after some major
Hey,
surgery.
great.
So maybe a round of applause for Jeff. How about that? Okay, thank you very much. We had just two questions. First one from your prior workshop had to do with the presentation on bicycle master plan. The question was, what is the timeline for connection of the Gailey-Wilson Trail to the city of Ankeny? This is a trail that goes between the city of Des Moines and Ankeny. It's a joint project of Polk County Conservation and the city of Ankeny. Work has already begun on the engineering, and they've assembled most of the funding. They're putting together an application for CAT funds out of the state of Iowa. If that a particular grant award occurs, then the construction should begin later this year. And even if it's not awarded, my understanding is that they'll begin some of the work later this year. So that project is moving along. Most of the funding is there. They're trying to assemble a bit more through a CAT grant. Second question, can the bicycle ordinance as discussed by the Metro Advisory Council be forward for formal adoption? The bicycle ordinance, as was discussed at the MAC, is scheduled for a workshop before you all in February of this year. I think that was your request, and we're getting that one prepared, and we'll bring that back before you in February. Mr. Mayor, those were the two questions and responses. I'd be happy to answer questions.
Anybody have any questions at this moment? Let's move on to the budget review.
Mr. Mayor, council members, as Alan is getting up, keep in mind we're in the middle of a two-year balanced budget. Our balanced budget numbers look good. We're going to review those for you as well this morning. Most of the change in your budget is going to occur in the capital side of the ledger, so we have spent considerable effort and have a report for you today on the capital budget and some of the key changes that are occurring within that document that we'll touch on operating a bit later. You might consider today's presentation on the capital budget the first of two. This is really the introduction. The document that you have has a lot of detail in it, which we're not going to have time to go through today, but at your leisure, go through that, and then we can schedule another workshop and take up specific questions that you might have. But with that, Alan, you're on.
Mayor, members of council, Alan McKinley, Deputy City Manager. This presentation will be quite similar to the one that we provided to you last year. It seemed to work well. We have some overview slides at the very beginning that I'm going to kind of fly through. We really want to focus on staff's highlights of significant changes in the CIP from the current adopted CIP, and we've done it by project category, the broad categories, and so we're not going to touch on every single project, especially when ones that haven't really changed in scope or magnitude. We really want to help you to focus on those projects that we are either adding to the project, to the CIP, or that we're making significant adjustments to. I will tell you just overall, there are a couple of major changes in the CIP, and again, this is also focused on the GEO bond portion of the CIP. We'll do another one on the enterprise operations, but a couple of the items that are going to have a major impact on our GEO bonding level is the continued extension of the Southeast Connector farther east. The CIP reflects an acceleration of that, which requires a significant increase in GEO bonding in our 6-year program and early on. And then, of course, all of the ADA improvements that are required that we're under negotiation to the Department of Justice. The timelines are also short in that, and so we've had to incorporate additional funding across the CIP program to address those needs. And we'll touch base on those shortly. This is for you to read, not right now through specifically, but it is our guiding principles that we have walked through over the several years and worked through that relates to project criteria, the TIF policy, satisfaction surveys, the third bullet. We actively pursue grants and private funding, and of course we also operate the CIP within our debt management policy. In summary, this is showing you right now the recommended bonding levels in the CIP program as compared to the current adopted. So you'll see in the last column the difference. Some mostly pluses, some reductions in FY15, and that really results in, as a result of pushing some bonding into the front end of the program, obviously resulting in a reduction in some of the out years. But it's about $10 million that are being added in on Southeast Connector and a $2.5 million in ADA improvements that are going to be bond funded.
Alan, you might mention on that increase, one of the reasons we're able to do that and hold the debt service levy rate is our refinancing, so perhaps you'll touch on that on the next slide.
Yes. And I'll do that in the slide after this one. This is just to give you a general overview of what our efforts are, again, in the geo bonding side of the capital improvements program. Now, these expenditures, again, streets, sidewalks, and traffic control is a major portion of our capital improvements program and our capital effort, which is not surprising. This is a table that's going to show you the top half is what's being proposed by major category. The middle part is what's in the current adopted CIP, and the bottom third is the change or the difference between the top and the middle sections, just again from a very high level by major category. We've handed out to you as well some 30 pages of more detailed about individual projects, and then in the next, we anticipate maybe in the next 10 days we'll have a completed CIP document, hopefully, that will be distributed to you that will have all of the narratives of all of the different projects. But we wanted to get this to you so you can see what the changes are. Back in FY06, the debt service levy was scheduled or was at 3.55, and at that time we provided a projection for you going out to FY12 of what the debt service levy would be doing if we followed the CIP that was adopted at that point in time. And it had some assumptions, obviously, for valuation growth, and it showed the debt levy going up to $5.19. We anticipate the FY12 debt service levy will be in the range of 3.95. That large gap, that large difference there is a result of several years of actions that the Council has been willing to take to reduce the CIP bonding levels from GO bonds, as well as your willingness to undertake several refinancings of GO debt that has been allowed us to reduce our annual principal and interest payments. We've shared before some $13+ million just in the last 3 years of net present value savings on GO bond refinancings. And so that allows us to do two things, both lower the debt service levy from that original $5.19, but also allow us to fit in some of these additional increases that are needed in the CIP this year, but still maintain a debt service levy that is at or below what was adopted in FY11. So it's still significantly lower than what was anticipated some 5 years ago.
So, Alan, even though we're adding almost $10 million of GO debt, the fact that we've refinanced has lowered our debt service overall, which has allowed us then to present a budget to you where that debt service levy rate that you see here for FY12 of 3.95 essentially holds constant over the term of the CIP.
Correct. This is the same chart as you saw a couple slides back. This is related now to tax increment supported GO bonds. There's a large increase in FY12 and then offsetting decreases in FY13 and 14. We'll touch base on that, but it's primarily related to the shifting of a project up into the CIP, that being the Municipal Service Center that's been talked about recently, and shifting out what was programmed in here for the East Side parking garage and City Hall annex facility farther out into the plan. several years out into the plan. But in order to address the need of the Municipal Service Center, we needed to shift those resources out. This is the same chart for the TIF bonds as we had for the GO bonds, and you can see the proposed and the change from the adopted in that chart. This is total expenses by program, not it's in addition to the bonds, so that would include federal and state grants. Again, you'll have all of the detailed projects with all of the funding sources and all of the timing of revenues and expenses when we produce the document. This is where we really wanted to spend our significant amount of time, and staff has provided in a review of the recommended CIP kind of the major highlights in each section. And actually in the bridge and viaducts one, we're pretty much continuing on in the same funding levels. We've had some shifting based on timing of projects or grant awards. Not a significant change, I don't believe, in the bridge and viaduct projects over the 5-year program. But just as a reminder, there's $2 million of gaming revenue that's in the bridge and viaduct program. Some $3 million roughly is in the streets section as well.
Can I just ask a question on that? And this might be for Jeb, but with this work being done, you've got 2 bridges. It's my understanding we'll do the demolition of the Grand Avenue Bridge, and that'll actually be closed. There won't be a bridge, and we're also doing, I didn't realize it, but we're doing it for Fleur Drive as well, and that's going to be closed. Are those going to be closed at the very same time, or will they be different dates? I mean, because they're kind of
Council,
connected.
Jeb Brewer, City Engineer. It shows it fiscal year 12, but actually the construction seasons, Fleur will be this coming construction season, Grand Avenue will be the following construction season.
Okay.
So it'll be in 12, the summer of 12 versus summer of 11.
Okay.
Summer 11 for Fleur, summer of 12. But the fiscal year starts, and we got to get Grand started early in the winter, so it'll be starting in the fiscal year 12.
Okay. Thank you.
The fire CIP highlights, the items, there's 4 of them listed there. There aren't any really any new projects that are incorporated into here, but we did want to point out that there are $3 million worth of IJOB grant that's been awarded for the maintenance and logistics facility. And there's about $700,000 from an AFG grant related to new generators, alarms, and sprinklers that we've been able to take advantage of. But we're moving forward on the maintenance and logistics training campus, and the new central fire station is also moving forward as planned in the current adopted CIP and now in the recommended CIP. And the last bullet, there's $10 million of equipment that's anticipated to be replaced over the course of the CIP program. And the following sheet in your presentation shows you the types of equipment that's being replaced over that program. For the library, of course, we're moving forward with the completion of the Franklin Avenue library. Just wanted to provide you some highlights related to collections additions. The Southeast Branch Library, we have programmed $25,000 worth of bonds in 2012 to update the needs analysis. And obviously there are capital and operating implications related to that. We've scheduled it out a few years in the program dependent upon fundraising capabilities in order to get that project completed.
By the way, just since you're pausing on the library, if I could just divert for one moment, I do want to acknowledge Greg Hyde, our new library director, is in the audience today. You want to raise your hand or stand up? Greg, welcome. Nice to have you here.
The miscellaneous, we're on slide 15 now, the miscellaneous CIP highlights. We continue, this was a new category actually that was added last year. We have some projects that just don't really fit in any of the other categories, so it used to be called, I think, economic development or neighborhood and economic development, and it just didn't seem to fit well. So we created the miscellaneous category last year and put some of these in here. And obviously the NFC and NDC, the $1 million per year, is still programmed in. Significant grant money for voice radio interoperability, $3 million grant there. Our ERP program has an increase of $500,000 in the program, and that's based on our most recent information from our consultant. But obviously when we go into an RFP process, we'll see what the prices come in at.
Can I pause you for just 1 second? You'll notice towards the top, the public art. The Public Art Foundation has been funded by the council at, I believe, around $250,000 a year. Last year, when you approved the CIP, you made the decision to reduce that funding amount to $100,000 beginning this year. So the $100,000 you see here is a reduction over what we've provided to the Public Art Foundation in the past. I know some of you have some concern about that, so I'd welcome any comments you have on that particular funding. What we've reflected here is what essentially is in the budget, so if there's a different thought from you, we'd be happy to take a look at that.
Okay, Skip, this is where you get to be supportive of public art. Remember that comment?
Yeah, I've been waiting for the explanation. I'm already supportive.
What I would like to see is this year, when we approved the 2-year proposed budget, it was because we were looking at not knowing what the revenue stream was going to be. The revenue stream has been higher. I would like to see us go back and increase it this year and then reevaluate it in the next year, and for several reasons. Number one, it does leverage additional grant dollars very effectively, and I'd like to have, there's supposed to be a workshop presentation on that item for them to give the update in the report. So I'd at least like to see what it was at the level this year. And this year it's at
200,000, I believe.
200.
Is that correct? Yeah, 200,000.
And the other item I would just add is you have several cities throughout the state that have actually made it mandatory. They have an ordinance that requires all public buildings to have, I think it's 1% or 1.5% set aside to go directly towards public art as part of the project. And our ordinance doesn't make it mandatory, it suggests.
It's a suggestion.
Yeah.
I think there's some cities that actually, any project, it's not just public projects, have
Correct,
to make a commitment to.
We have a tentative schedule on
The other piece I'd like to add to it, Alan, is the information that we're getting out of Washington. I think that we ought to keep our fingers crossed. We get CDBG, goes to zero. We're going to have to find some money in a number of places. So I think we need to be careful about where money comes from and where it's going till we really know what kind of support we're going to get from the federal government. We anticipate a certain amount. If we get zero or somewhere in between that and what, about $4.5–5 million, that could be a big hit.
Right. We have a tentative scheduled date for public art presentation of next Monday, the 31st.
Okay.
Continuation of the municipal building slide, and the top one is a big one, and there's actually the second slide after this one. The next slide after this one has some more detail for you. But ADA modifications, our legal department and city staff have been working on the Department of Justice Project Civic Access. We have a specific project in our CIP that's related to this, but we do have other projects in the CIP that has municipal facilities already in a capital improvements program that we've added the ADA impact into those projects as well. It's a big number. We're looking at additional funding for sidewalk ADA compliance. That's not wholly funded in our CIP at this point, but we are in the midst of negotiations and trying to determine what the total fiscal impact is. And I will touch base on that on slide 17. And I just want to go through the rest of these. Anything in particular that you decide? I'm sorry.
This is such a big number, I think it's worth at least a little comment. Are we going to have a more specific conversation like we might about public art on this? And is that scheduled yet?
For the next workshop, we're going to have a presentation on public art. But
on this
I'm
item
talking
as well?
about the ADA.
ADA?
We have not planned a workshop on that, Mr. Coleman. We can. We've got in your packet in here a pretty detailed listing of all of the ADA projects. And as Alan said, this has been through a Department of Justice process. And I'm looking at Carol Mosier, I think, has really led the charge from legal standpoint. These are pretty close to mandates. I don't know that we have a whole lot of discretion on it.
I appreciate you saying that, and I understand the Department of Justice, and actually I agree with them all. I think our community is uniquely positioned to be very welcoming to people with disabilities, and with our Skywalk system and others, I'm positive and would support it. I also know that it results from a kind of a federal mandate, and it would be great to have a better understanding for our citizens why we're doing these things, and to know why we're pushing off other projects. You know, the first slide shows us, spending a lot more money on this than other things we anticipated spending money on a year ago. And I think it's fair that they know it. And I guess I'd like to know more for our legislative agenda. It makes sense to me that when we're in Washington, D.C. and other places, this would be a natural thing to be asking that Congress consider funding for. It's a federal law that we're implementing, but our local citizens have to pay for it. And, like a lot of things, older cities tend to have more problems. We built things before the ADA existed, and so we have more things that we have to retrofit. So laws like this tend to affect us and the amount of money we have to tax our citizens for more than a newer community like a Waukee or an Altoona or anywhere else. And I think it's worth taking 15 minutes and talking about the projects and talking about how we might make a case to Congress.
Mr. Coleman, I think you make really good points. You've got $6.6 million in your capital budget. That amount has been increased by 2.5 with this proposed budget. So it is a very significant financial obligation upon the taxpayers of Des Moines to do the ADA work. Nobody's going to argue with the virtue of doing it, as you pointed out, but it is a significant cost burden on us, and it would be wonderful if our friends in Congress would view this as something that perhaps they can help out a little bit, which they do in so many other areas, but have not seen fit to provide much public funding to assist cities in this particular effort. So I think you're raising a good point in your notion about working with our delegation, although, as the mayor just pointed out, the trend seems to be going pretty much the other way these days in terms of federal assistance.
I'll come back to the previous slide. But here is the listing of the Project Civic Access, and it adds up to about $6.6 million. And the timing constraints that we're faced with at the top being 6, 12, 18, 24, and 30 months for completion date. Again, these are spread throughout the CIP depending on what particular improvement is required, whether it's in our parking system or funded from GO bonds, which is the $2.5 million or $2 million increase. I just want to briefly touch base with you on some of the process that's happened. We've arrived at this point at these different improvements. Our engineering staff, and with the assistance of a consultant, has priced out all of these anticipated improvements. But I think there will be a process that the city staff will go through, a cost-benefit analysis, if you will, on each one of those improvements to decide, well, maybe it's not prudent for us to spend that amount of money to address that specific ADA need, and maybe the facility, if it's a small facility, a small restroom or something of that nature, it may not remain in our infrastructure at all. And there are other ways of, if a countertop is too high, it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to take out the entire countertop. You can maybe make a section of the countertop accessible, ADA accessible, without having to incur the total expense. So this may come down in price. It may go up. But this is our best guess at this point, and it does exclude at this point our curb cut program, which could be a couple $1 million as well, and we're going to go through that same process with those projects as well.
One quick question just about the totals at the bottom. Rick, you mentioned some numbers. I thought you said 6-point-something million, and we added $2 million to it.
The total ADA compliance program is about 6.6 million. You see that number reflected at the bottom and sort of the middle of the page on this chart. The amount that we've added this year that's new is 2.5 million.
So we went from 4-point-something to
4.1.
okay.
In the CIP, there's a project that's specifically related to ADA that are our general buildings, City Hall, community centers, Armory, Police Department. Those buildings we've increased funding by $2.5 million, but there is significant dollars, for instance, added in the CIP in a parks project called Principal Park. So the CIP has been raised by more than just the 2.5, but that ADA project civic access account in our municipal buildings account has been increased by about to $2.5 million.
There's one other sort of point I'd like to make here about ADA, and it's its impact on Principal Park. You'll see here the total ADA work at Principal Park is estimated about $1.2 million, I think. Principal Park is a facility. It's about 20 years old. It's a wonderful facility, but like any building, it requires ongoing maintenance and repair. What we've had to do is shift some of those resources that we might otherwise utilize to maintain that building into this particular account, but I want to simply make the point that we're going to have to continue to focus on Principal Park as a major facility that gets a lot of use. That undoubtedly we're going to have to look at spending some dollars on that facility, just in the way of normal upkeep and maintenance. You might recall a couple years ago we had some issues with some structural issues at the building that we had to do on an emergency basis. We're not talking about anything that's exactly like that, but I think the need for ongoing maintenance and repair and upkeep of that facility is certainly before us, and we're going to have to address it in the near future. So just to keep that particular point in mind.
Just dropping back a slide, obviously the Municipal Service Center, as I mentioned previously, has been incorporated into our capital program, has about $15 million worth of TIF bonds. Those were offset by a similar reduction related again to the East Side Parking Garage, City Hall Annex, and some fire suppression work in City Hall to try to offset that increase. And I think there's been some presentations to council previously on this project, and so we're moving forward with consultant RFP at this point.
Alan, does that reflect the cost of moving the supply yard down to the old Des Moines asphalt site?
We had funds available in some projects that are related to that area that allows us, actually in addition to those funds that were bonds already sold, that allows us to make that relocation. The park highlights, again, the first bullet point, we've already talked about it, but the fact that public art was moved over into the miscellaneous section of the CIP, and we've had that discussion. And you can see the bottom of the Principal Park project has $2.2 million included in it for needed structural and ADA improvements. Blank Park Zoo project is still in the CIP. We've been working with the foundation. Looks like our commitment there is about $8.1 million moving forward as of our latest understanding.
Could we have an update on that too, just from fundraising and where exactly they're at? I haven't heard anything on that for a while. And I see on the Blank Park Zoo, and I see that we're decreasing our commitment from 10.
Yes.
I can give you a quick. Go ahead, Rick.
Well, we do have. We've been actually making very good progress. I should ask Don to come up and talk about it. But we We're very close to having a proposal to put in front of you that would allow that project to go forward. And so we'll have that, I think probably within the next couple of weeks we'll be able to give you a full presentation on it. But this number is, the 8.1 is predicated upon the proposals that Blank Park Zoo Foundation has given us, and I think we're going to have a deal to suggest to you, so it's coming along pretty well.
Excellent.
The zoo board actually discusses it tomorrow, I think, is the board meeting, and the current draft of where they're at, and
Okay.
I think it'll be viewed favorably and probably back here within a couple of weeks.
Okay.
There's a continuation on to page 2 of the parks highlights. I suppose the fourth bullet point down, there are funds programmed in FY12 to look at dog parks with some minor amenities. And that's scheduled for FY12, and I think we've listed there some of the forestry improvements, the street tree replacement fund. I think that was that transferred over to the miscellaneous?
No, there's a forestry project in Parks
and
the miscellaneous. There's a bullet.
Okay, the street tree replacement fund is in the miscellaneous that we've already gone through, but that's the program that replaces trees that were lost due to construction projects. Each year there's an evaluation made and determine a value, and once that evaluation is made, we program that into the next year. So we have an actual amount that's scheduled for FY12 and then estimates moving forward that's provided by our engineering department. In our street program, a couple of highlights for you on this page. There is a streetscapes project, improvements project, that is currently will reflect just the city dollars anticipated to be spent. At this point, the ones that have been identified as potential streetscape projects are the Beaver Avenue, Highland Park Phase 2, and Ingersoll Phase 2. There are enough funds in the program to handle preliminary or full design of streetscape projects. And then this spring, I think we talked about maybe doing a presentation to council on the streetscape program and under the current what the current guidelines are as a review of as far as what private fundraising requirements are under the current guidelines.
Let me just sort of emphasize a couple of points here. What's proposed to you is that there be adequate dollars in the CIP to do the design work for those 3 projects that are identified. There is then capital dollars beginning in year 2 through several years thereafter that would actually handle construction. There's 2 sort of guiding principles among many that are particularly important here about streetscape. One is that we have to be more sensitive to cost control. Some of these projects have gotten to be too expensive, and so we have to really focus on bringing forth projects that we can afford and that the city would participate in. If neighbors want to do more than that, they can provide those embellishments and enhancements, but then they can pay for them. So we're going to try to move the project forward, but we're going to try to focus on the basic elements of a streetscape project in an effort to control cost. The other thing that's important, that's been debated a lot, has been the notion of the private funding. What occurs to me is that neighborhoods have varying capacities to put private dollars into this. Ingersoll has done really well in terms of the private funding, and I would be confident that they could continue to put private dollars into this. But a neighborhood like Highland Park, frankly, has less capacity to do that. So I think we've got to be sensitive to that fact that ability to pay does vary among these projects, and so we're going to have to figure out some way to account for that as we go forward on the project. But as it mentions here, these policies and programmatic details are going to be brought back to you. We'll have discussion about it later this spring.
So what is the actual dollar amount that's in here for 2012 and future years? Do we?
We have the detail. I'll ask Alan to kind of. I think the first year is about a $500,000, if I remember, $450,000 or $500,000, and then there's.
While he's looking that up, Rick, I just want to say I appreciate it. I think these are critical. When we did our goal statements 2 years ago, re-energizing these corridors around the city were one of our top goals, and this is about the only thing we do for them. So I feel strongly about it, and I hope when we come back we talk about the words private funds, because I think the private funds are pretty easy to describe. It's things like special grants and money from Polk County and others that gets confusing as to, what does the city count and what does the neighborhood count for going out and working on it.
In the CIP, we will have about $3.5 million of new bonding, bonds that have not yet been sold, scheduled, with about 1.3 in fiscal 13. We have some carryover bonds that are carrying over into FY12 because projects that just haven't gotten off the ground, and we were positioning ourselves to be able to handle that part of the project. So we do have carryover bonds that are available. I don't have the exact dollar amount, but it would certainly be able to handle design portions of the streetscape projects that we've
in the
listed
first year of
above.
the program in FY12.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
The fourth bullet down again is what I mentioned at the very beginning, and that is we have programmed in the Southeast Connector. It used to be shown in two segments, Southeast 14th to 18th and then 18th to 30th, but with the concentrated effort to try to complete that all in one project, we've just consolidated into a project called Southeast Connector. Just for your understanding, it's about a $60 million project. There's about $45 million in grants, and as mentioned in there in the narrative, those are certainly not locked down amounts that we can bank on at this point, and there's about $15 million of a local match that's built into that as well. We do have some ongoing projects that are in year after year in the CIP for streets and traffic and skywalks and sidewalks, and those are listed here for you. And again, each of these would be projects sheets that will show up in our regular capital improvements program document, but we just wanted to show you that we do have ongoing programs in the CIP to deal with our major infrastructure of the city. Continuing on with the street highlights, which also includes, again, traffic control, sidewalks, and skywalks. The last bullet item, there's $1 million budgeted in FY11 and 12 for the new skywalk sign system. I think that came as a result of a study and as a needed improvement that was identified out of that study.
On that last one, skywalk system, you will recall the presentation we made at workshop. Your comments back to me about that proposal were very positive, and so we've included the funding here. If you think otherwise about that particular item, why, please let me know. But we've put the funding in here in an attempt to be responsive to what I thought your desires were following that.
And what is the rest of the funding for that? The Downtown Community Alliance?
There would
so
be,
is it a third?
We don't have a particular formula, Christine, but clearly when you start talking about the repairs to the skywalk system, it's going to have to be a jointly funded effort. We don't have enough money to do all of it. What's programmed here would be money for the signage, but when you start talking about the repairs of the system, that will be a joint effort.
Private sector,
private
so repairs, we would be talking about the bridges that are our responsibility, correct?
The bridges would be our responsibility. The corridors would have to be a private responsibility, and so there's a good deal of negotiating that has to take place before we get to that point on it.
Okay.
But the concept is there has to be significant private dollars for that to go forward.
We don't expect you to have a specific list of questions already developed by going through the PowerPoint, but over the course of the next week or two, as you are able to go through this and as we get the document out, our intent would be to have future workshops to respond to any questions that you may have on specific projects or policies or directions that we've made changes into the CIP over the next, over the next 2 or 3 weeks.
Ellen, you might mention that the balance of the handout, I think that they each have, contains a good deal of detail about each of the programmatic categories within the CIP. It's not the document per se, but it does give you a lot of information about the projects and the funding amounts. So there's a lot of material to review here that we haven't gone over this morning.
Correct. And what we've really focused on here is, the geo bonding levels, which has an impact on our debt service levy and our tax increment bonding. And so, we've talked about those as being the dollar amounts that we focused on. But when you actually go into the other 30 pages of the presentation that's for you, that's going to incorporate all of the dollars. So you'll see, when you see a number that's quite a bit higher than maybe what's listed in the very beginning, it will include, any private and state grant money that it will be coming into the system and then spent as part of the project.
So when do I get my library then? Is that, it's not next year?
I believe you get a study, though.
Awesome.
We wanted to also do a quick overview for you on the operating budget. As you know, last year, Council, I think prudently, made the decision to not only undertake balancing the FY11 budget, which is the budget year that we're in right now, but also to take action to move us towards balancing the FY12 budget so that we don't have to go through this pain every year, and maybe we can take a year off knowing that we've dealt with the reductions that need to be made in order to balance the FY12 budget. And we'll share with you just a broad overview of where we stand on that, and we are balanced, and we're trying to move that policy forward into the future years. The tax rate is not changing per your direction. We're still at 1657. We've planned for that in the FY12 budget as well as the FY13 and 14 budget. But there are implications for that, and that can certainly be revisited in the future. But I wanted to assure you that we've prepared the FY12 budget for next year with the assumption of no change in tax rate. This chart, again, from a broad perspective, revenue is broken down just into property taxes and non-property taxes, and then the expenses below that. The blue columns are what was adopted back in February of 2010.
These numbers are in thousands. Right?
These are in thousands. So net operations, FY11 was about $2,875,000. But in order to fit the table onto the screen, we rounded it down to into the thousands. You'll see the FY12 blue projected. This was like in February of 2010. It was $1,420,000 deficit position, but the city manager had included in that the anticipation of negotiating lower employee costs, either in both in wages and in health insurance. He came back to the council in, I think it was in May, being able to have accomplished that on the wage side. And then we also had some very favorable premium renewal rates for our health insurance. So FY11 adopted, we had about almost a $2.9 million surplus anticipated. Our FY11 budget looks like it's really going to be around $1.5 million. I think I shared with you some of those impacts previously related to Chapter 411 medical costs and workers' comp costs being our experience has been higher. Some of our contractual services, that's buried part of our contractual service number there of $30,919,000. We've had some increased operating costs in our fleet operations as well. parts and repairs. But the good news is that FY12, through those COLA adjustments, wage adjustments, and health insurance adjustments, we have about a $1.4 million surplus for the fiscal year of FY12. We've had slightly higher property taxes, significantly higher property taxes actually from what we had projected in FY12. Valuations came in and rollback came in higher than what was projected at the time about a year ago. But that doesn't mean that we're out of the woods. As you can see, in FY13 a year ago, we thought we were going to be about $6.7 million in the hole. Now, the impacts of those wage adjustments and the health insurance renewal rates, the property taxes, those things carry forward all out into the future. And so we're at, right now we're looking at about an $872,000 gap. We'll obviously need to be watching that and reviewing it to see if it goes up or down. We prefer it to go down, obviously. But that is actually 1 year beyond our current requirement to adopt a budget, which is the FY12 column. I've provided for you as well what FY14 looks like. We have built into 13 and 14 an assumption of an average wage adjustment of around 2%, in order to, reasonably project out what our expenses will be. We've incorporated into the employee costs the municipal fire and police retirement systems projection of rate contributions for pensions. That's in the employee cost row going out. And so we've really turned the corner quite a bit for FY13, but looking beyond that, FY14 and beyond, there won't be any magic. You can probably figure out what FY15 will look like based on what FY14 is. Our expense estimates for maintaining current levels of services just exceeds what our revenue estimates are.
So here's the sort of the short summary is the FY13 revised number of $872,000 on the short side is sort of within hailing distance if we manage properly over the next 2 years or so. But then getting to FY14, we're close to $5 million in the hole, and that number accelerates as time goes on with all the variables that we've talked about before. So the fundamental dynamic of the structural deficit is still with us. But your actions and decisions have held us in very good stead right now. And you've got sort of a potential for a rolling 2-year budget once again. So if we manage properly, we'll be able to get through 12 and into 13 pretty close to budget without major adjustments, assuming we hit our employee cost targets and so on. But FY14, we are certainly challenged again.
Well, and the other thing that obviously this doesn't take into account because we don't know what it's going to be, or all the federal and state discussions going on that will clearly have an impact on it, especially when you look at the state discussions going on and the impact with property taxes.
Thank you for saying that, because it is absolutely true. There are any number of proposals in the State House right now that would put us in the tank big time. And so we're going to have to monitor that very carefully. These, by the way, assume none of those things happen. So if any of it happens, even to a small degree, these numbers worsen quite dramatically, quite quickly.
Alan, are those numbers reflective of your current understanding of the 411 situation as we move forward?
Yes, they are.
Okay.
The 411 system, just for your own knowledge and background, they have an actuary contract with an actuarial consultant out of Omaha, very good, and has had that relationship with the system since the mid-1990s, and they do the annual evaluation of what the contribution rate will be for the following year. Last year, the board asked for them to start to project out what those contribution rates would be based on assumptions, 2 or 3 different investment return assumptions. This is the contribution rate that's been incorporated in here is based on investment earnings that are based on what our current assumptions are, which is about a 7.5% return per year. So they did valuations based on a 3.75, a 7.5, and a 10% return. And since the whole system is based on a 7.5% return, this has been based on that 7.5% return.
To just further clarify Mrs. Hensley's statement, it is not reflective of any anticipated or proposed changes in commercial property.
No.
Okay.
You know what might be helpful, just so we could have discussion and maybe have a little more public input, would be we've done it previously where we've had a legislative agenda summary on the council agenda. That might be good to incorporate that again, so that maybe as some of these bills that clearly will have an impact on cities, that there's at least some information in the council agenda, as well as we might want to pull it off and just highlight some of those items from time to time.
I think it's a great idea. We'd be happy to pull that work together. Is your thought, Christine, on the regular agenda or on workshop agendas?
I think on regular agendas.
Okay. We'll try to get that geared up. We are working with the Metro Coalition on a similar kind of initiative, so we might have a broader perspective as well as our own that we could put in front of you.
Alan, looking, projecting for the fiscal year 11, our actual expenses versus budget, are we pretty much in line, or are we any areas that we're getting in trouble?
Well, we've made some adjustments that are shown up there, primarily in as far as additional expense levels that we're looking at. I had mentioned our workers' comp experience, and I always say workers' comp and then Chapter 411, and that's because the equivalent of workers' comp for our sworn employees is not part of Chapter 20. For workers' comp, it's covered under Chapter 411 or 18. I can't remember what the chapter is, but we've experienced some higher costs in that area, and we've programmed that into the operating budget as an expense. But most of our other areas, you'll see supplies and capital outlay up there. Actually, it has gone down about $100,000. Some of that's grant related. The grants are falling away, and so the capital outlay is falling away. But we've tried to stay very close to what those budget items are. The ones that are kind of out of our control, we've addressed those as best we can.
So it looks like we're pretty much in line then. We won't have any big surprises at the year end.
We're hoping not.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Manager, I'm not sure what your schedule is in terms of our budget and proposals as our council is going to work through this. But I think that one thing that I think you got good marks for last year was the meetings that we held out in the community and asked for input. I hope that we're going to give our citizens in their neighborhoods, either in the library or some public place, an opportunity to look at what we're going to propose prior to adoption.
Mr. Mayor, I think while we don't have anything scheduled right now, the primarily because we were looking at a maintenance of level effort in terms of our operating budget, so there's not a lot of change there. The area where there is change is capital. We've talked about that this morning, and we can take a look at setting up something to solicit public input on that side of the ledger, if you like.
Well, I think we find on our phones at home that there's questions on a variety of issues from time to time, and I think that while they enjoy that face-to-face or ear-to-ear contact that they get with us, I think being involved or feeling like they're involved on the front end of the process, I think citizens truly appreciate. So I would encourage that we try to do it again. How's anybody else?
I agree.
Okay. Any other questions? Did you want to review the workshop calendar?
Yes.
Thanks, Al.
maybe Alan can stay here because you've done the work with Diane. We're having, to be blunt about it, having some difficulty in getting these scheduled. And we thought this morning we could talk to you a little bit about going forward from here. As we said at the very beginning, it seems to me where the council interaction and discussion and direction is needed is mostly on the operating side or the capital side. And I'd like to schedule some workshops, maybe one or two more, where we can further dialogue on the capital side. But we're having some problem getting a date, so we thought we'd talk about it for just a couple minutes here and see if we can arrive at a time that works for all of you.
We have plenty of other agenda items that we can put on the workshop agenda besides the budget. We've kind of pushed those off until we can get through this part. But we have scheduled public art, but we have several items that are ready to go in addition to the budget workshops. Right now we have tentatively scheduled, where we have scheduled the 31st of January, next Monday.
And then the 14th and 28th.
And 14th and 28th.
Somebody say something about the 27th earlier?
Did that not work?
Yeah, is the issue that those dates don't work, or is that not enough?
We had some that were just, we had conflicts for various council members, and so.
Well, I know I was one that had a conflict on one of them, but I mean, I don't think you should stop meeting because I can't be here. I mean, if there were 3 or 4 of us that can't.
You're the most important part.
Well, thank you, Brian. Thank you. That's just because I support the study of the library.
Well, right now the schedule shows, I'm going to look at Diane, the next workshop is tentatively scheduled for the 31st of January. That would be a week from today.
Yeah.
It would be helpful to have, I think maybe the problem is that waiting 2 weeks after that to the 14th of February is a bit problematic.
Do you want one the 7th?
The 7th would be good.
I can do the 7th.
7th, fine with me.
Yeah, fine with me.
We're going for the 7th at 7:30. Is that okay? Mr. Mayor?
Fine with me.
Skip? Bob, Hallie? Brian? Okay. Going once, going twice.
So the next 3 Mondays we have them.
Next 3 Mondays.
Okay.
It's the 14th. I won't be here, so.
Well, let's cancel that one then.
Yes, thank you.
So the next 3 Mondays we'll
Don't
have.
bring up your Southside Library without me.
Yeah, we better not have a council meeting that night either, Chris.
Okay, thank you. Very much appreciate that.
Any other questions for staff or otherwise? Let's open it up for any public comment. Anyone in the audience, staff or visitors, want to make some comments? Jason, any thoughts? All right. Thank you all. We'll see you this evening. We stand adjourned.